And the last bit reminded me of a Bhagirath.
I found the whole film absolutely fascinating.
He's my husband too. He's my husband.
Complex divide.
Each of them say, no, she did this, she did that, she ran away.
It's that sense of humor you kept talking about.
வணக்கம். உலக லெவலில் யுனைடெட் நேஷன்ஸ் வந்து இந்த வருஷத்தை வந்து இயர் ஆஃப் இண்டிஜினஸ் லாங்குவேஜஸ் அப்படின்னு இருக்காங்க. பாரம்பரிய லாங்குவேஜஸ், மொழிகள். அண்ட் இன்றைக்கி வந்து எங்கள் ஃபிலிம் கிளப் சினிமா ராண்டேவூவில் நாங்கள் காட்ட போகிற படம் வந்து 10 கனூஸுங்கிறது ஆஸ்திரேலியன் அபாரிஜினல் லாங்குவேஜ், அவங்களோட இண்டிஜினஸ் லாங்குவேஜில் எடுக்கப்பட்ட, முழுமையாக அதில் எடுக்கப்பட்ட முதல் படம். 2006 வந்த படம் இது. ஸோ இது ஆஸ்திரேலியன் கான்சுலேட், சென்னையில் இருக்கிற கான்சுலேட் வந்து நம்ம ஃபிலிம் கிளப் சினிமா ராண்டேவோட பார்ட்னர்ஷிப்பில் இதை ப்ரெசென்ட் பண்ணியிருக்காங்க சென்னையில் இருக்கிற ஆடியன்ஸ்க்கு. திஸ் அ நைஸ் டர்ன் அவுட் கிராஸ் செக்ஷன் ஆஃப் பீப்புள். எங்கள் ஃபிலிம் கிளப்பில் எவ்ரி மந்த் வி ஹேவ் ஒன் ஸ்க்ரீனிங் அண்ட் டிஸ்கஷன். ஸோ இதில் டிஸ்கஷன் வந்து ரொம்ப முக்கியமானது. இந்த படங்களை பார்க்கலாம், பட் இங்கே வந்திருக்கிறப்போ வைஸ் கான்சல் ஆண்ட்ரூ வந்திருக்காரு. அவர் வந்து சர்வதேச லெவலில் வந்து ட்ரேட் நெகோசியேஷன்ஸ் இதிலெல்லாம் மற்ற கண்ட்ரிஸ், கம்போடியாவில் இருந்திருக்காரு, வியட்நாமில் இருந்திருக்காரு. ஸோ அந்த மாதிரி ஆட்களோட இங்கே நம்ம ஊர்லேருந்து கிருமி டைரக்ட் பண்ண அனுச்சரன் வந்து ஸ்பெஷல் இன்வைட்டியாக வராரு. ஸோ ஒரு படம் முடிந்த பிறகு நான் ஒரு இன்ட்ராக்டிவ் டிஸ்கஷன் வந்து மாடரேட் பண்ணுறேன். ஸோ இங்கேருந்து ஆஸ்திரேலியாவிலேருந்து வந்த ஒருத்தர், அங்கே சினிமாவை பயங்கரமாக நேசிக்கிறவர். அண்ட் ஆண்ட்ரூ கிட்ட ரொம்ப ஸ்பெஷலாக வைஸ் கான்சல்ட்ட என்னென்னா, அவர் வந்து தமிழ்நாட்டில் இருக்கிறப்ப சென்னையில் வந்து மக்களோட சேர்ந்து எல்லாத்தையும் தெரிஞ்சுக்கணும் அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு அப்ரிஷியேட் பண்ணுறவர், நல்ல நண்பர். அதனால தான் இதில் நாங்கள் கூட்டு முயற்சியாக அது பண்ணுறோம்.
Okay, tonight's screening of TENCANOES is brought to you by the Australian Consulate General in Chennai as part of NIDOC Week, a very special week in Australia where we celebrate the culture, achievements and history of Australia's Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Part of this culture is through art, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art is the oldest continuing tradition of art in the world. Today, through music, through dance, through visual art and increasingly through film, we celebrate this Indigenous culture. TENCANOES is a historically significant film as the first film ever made in Indigenous Australian language.
This video is powered by IAKR Films. For bookings, contact the given number.
Cinema Randezvous is a 7-year-old film club. We have one screening every month and we talk about cinema. We have a special invitee from the film industry. So we don't just talk about the story, the fashion, the actors in it, but talk more technical stuff too. So it's an interesting place to be, and we're working closely with Shasan College, the Wiscom students there. So I'm going to request both of them to come on stage and introduce our special invitee, Anucharan. Can you? Anucharan is here. He's director of Kirumi. A little note about him. We'll get you over for the discussion at the end of it, but who's speaking about Anucharan, and then a small brief about the film also.
Anucharan Murugaiyan is a filmmaker, screenplay writer and an editor working in Tamil film industry. He made his directorial debut in Australia with the short film Infinity, with a semi-finalist and Tropfest Sydney, the world's largest short film festival. His first feature film, Kirumi, The Virus, won the Best Film Award in Chennai International Film Festival and was screened in several film festivals across the world. He won the Best Screenplay Writer Award from Behind Woods for Andavan Kattalai, God's Order. He worked in widely lauded Kutramai Kandarai, Crime is Punishment and many other films in the capacity as an editor. He had just finished shooting his second directorial venture, Pannikutti Piglet, in May 2019. Thank you, sir. We welcome you.
10 Canoes is a 2006 Australian drama film directed by Rolf de Heer and Peter Jigger and starring Crusoe Kurdal. A cautionary tale laced with a cheeky sense of humor, 10 Canoes is one of the cinema's new authentic depictions of Indigenous Australian life. The film is set in Arnhem Land in the time separate of Western influence. It tells the story of a group of 10 men in a traditional hunting context. The leader of the group, Minygululu, tells the young Dayindi the story of another man even further in time who, like Dayindi, coveted his elder brother's youngest wife. The film is about for 92 minutes.
Wonderful to be sitting between these two people because while deciding on whom we should get as a special invitee. There's something about Kirumi, there is something about what I read about how you work with, how you started working with Manikandan's reference, and the kind of things you were saying even with Kirumi about this man depending on just his wife's income and then finally coming to, settling in to do that. So there's something, and I think there are a lot of entertaining films, good films we enjoy, but there are filmmakers, and I think he's one of them, who somewhere look for that entertainment with a certain very indigenous spirit in that. So first want to hear both your, like we heard him and Farah talk about that, the film. First want to hear your impressions about the film. Let's start with Anucharan.
Yeah, good evening. I like the film. the film actually, for me, I got to know more about Aborigines from the film than from my stay in Australia, and it was quite entertaining, and it was just really pleasing to watch their lifestyles and how they do things that they were doing in the film, like hunting and all those, and to avoid war there was a ceremony.
The law of the
laws and the entire lifestyle was quite unique and in some sense similar to us in some sense.
The sense of humor too.
Sorry?
Yeah, sense of humor too.
Exactly. Sense of humor. And the songs that they were singing in the death ceremony.
Opari.
Yeah, exactly. So those things had some connect with me while I was watching the film. And for me, film is a language, right? So the narrative structure of the film where there was one story going on and there was another story going on parallelly. But in that story, they were also showing us how the hunting and all the aspects.
Cutting back and forth is very interesting.
Yeah, was interesting. What I'm trying to say is, in the meantime, while they were narrating the story, they were also visually giving us the information about their lifestyles and all that. That was quite interesting for me because while writing a script, we don't normally go that way. For example, they were actually doing some sort of activity while narrating a story, right? So you either concentrate on the story or what they're doing. So both the things which were narrated while on the same story was quite unique for me as a script writer. And the best part of the whole film was the simplicity of the film, the use of craft and everything, and how simple and easily a story was told. That is one major thing that I'll take away from this film. Yeah.
I found it quite interesting even when, particularly this whole speculation thing, each of them say, no, she did this, she did that, she ran away. And then they go on to show it visually. I think the camera work there also, in one place, all of them round, it was going like that. So each time technically they've worked on it interestingly, and they're very particular, and as a group of people they're very particular that their stories be told from their their perspective be very strong, and it is very interesting to see how they were working about it. Can you tell us how you look at it as an Australian who's grown up there, and your general exposure, the problems we've seen with Charlie's Country or Rabbit Proof Friends, and how does it exist today, and this whole point of celebrating Noida as a week of all this, where, and I know the museum there is very active with all that, unlike most other countries.
Yes, indeed. I think it was really interesting to say that you spent time in Sydney, but you didn't know about the stories and the lifestyle. It's not a rare occurrence. Most city-dwelling Australians, be they they're a recent immigrant or their family have lived in Australia for 200 years, have little to no idea about Indigenous culture before white settlement or even to today. And there's still very much areas where Indigenous people don't get to tell their own story in the national conversation, that they do often have their story told for them, which, as Charlotte just said, it's about having their story told in their way. And this, I suppose, is where TENCANOES is a fascinating, it's not just a film in that regard. I think, as I said, I quoted the review before, that it's sharing the private world with a wider audience.
Anucharan, what did you think about the camera work and also the whole pace? So many of us who are watching films today would have found it going, the pacing slow. So what are your thoughts on that, being a young filmmaker onto your second project? And also, what do you notice in Tamil, like we had Pariyerum Perumal and stories like this coming up, which is not just popularly what works. So there are other kinds of stories which are more rooted in the land, like what you might have had in Bharadiraja's time, even with Padanaru Vaidyanile or something. But these stories becoming not just niche stories, but popular ones, which are being commercially successful. So your comments on the camera work, the pacing, and what's happening in Tamil industry in terms of voices like that.
I think it was really apt for the film. At a point, I truly forgot that there was a camera, which I think is probably the best compliment for the cameraman I can give, because to be able to go and stay there and without disturbing the environment or the lifestyle that's happening there, to capture that and bring back and make a movie out of it is the hardest work that you can do. Because the recent movie that I've done, I shot it in a village, not one village, more than one village, and to be able to go shoot there without disturbing their environment
And to get their trust.
To get their trust and to be able to get their lifestyles and to portray it exactly the way they are is one of the hardest things that you could do. And the camera work is like does that in this film. So
I like that place where it almost looked like that is the second time everybody was speculating. But you remember the shot where the cameras kept, they all come to the lens and talk with that white paint on. And there's one person in the last who almost tells you, yes, they've been asked to give their point of view. So I was actually thinking whether that was done like how you do in theatre, where it's not totally scripted, but the characters. So what about the pacing? Do you think this kind of pacing is here in India, if you look at it, or popular cinema all over the world? This is art house, alternate, and this is mainstream commercial. What's your thought on that?
Well, there was a joke in the film, right? Because the whole idea of telling the story to that young guy was to teach him about patience. I think we should learn.
It was for us also, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think, so I can't really comment about the pacing because that was teaching me how to be patient. What was the next one? And also because I'm still trying to process the ending. So the whole thing is running in my mind.
Yeah. So the other thing I asked you was about films now, like Pariyerum Perumal and other ones. There is a shift in wanting to hear not just urban stories, rural stories told by rural filmmakers, not with a sensibility like mine, which might just try to understand it, but be an original voice. What do you see that? How do you see that trend in Tamil Nadu?
I think it's really healthy. Both filmmakers from rural are succeeding, which is a very nice thing, and also film is getting to them. And filmmaking is not a very hard subject to understand if you know the basics, and I think everybody's entitled to tell their story in the way they want to communicate it. And filmmaking is one of the fine ways to do it. And for me, any rural guy who comes out and does a great film is something to be celebrated. So
that's nice to hear. But I want to ask Andrew, how difficult is it to make these kind of projects, which are not just the popular Australian actors or Hollywood-based films? How does the government play a role in this?
I mean, there's not a massive role for government in that, to be honest. It's these connections, they're personal connections, and I think telling a story like this, and not just this film, but other elements of, I suppose, commercialising Indigenous stories, it's very fraught, and there's a lot of issues about ownership, not only within between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, but within Indigenous communities. It's about who owns that story. And Gita Wolf from Tara Books, I've been talking to her, and they've been doing Australian-focused 3 stories. They went out to Central Australia and developed stories for their books with Indigenous Australian artists. And one is someone's personal collection, but a couple of others are telling traditional stories. And I know that they've then found it very hard to turn that into an actual book, because a lot of these things were never written. And those stories, like we just saw in TENCANOES, it would have been a long story between the tribe that would have been passed down. But they wouldn't have been written, they wouldn't have been made into films.
So, how much of recognition do these stories get in mainstream theatres there? Because we did play the theatrical release. There's another one which has the narration also in indigenous voice, but this was the theatrical release. So, how much of recognition do these films get? Do they do commercially well as compared to other productions there? Or is it just government patronage, organizational patronage?
I mean, it's part of, I suppose, the Australian film industry. This is me talking as a film lover. The Australian film industry in general is not in a great space. I think it's like a lot of you see in America as well, that we don't do big budget productions in Australia, and they're getting crowded out by big budget productions from elsewhere. People are staying home, they're watching Netflix, they're going out to see only the big films. So it is, I think, it's a double challenge for films like this, where they're in a climate where film in general, which isn't a big blockbuster, is becoming less popular, and they're telling stories that have historically been marginalised. So there's a great amount of critical reception and critical thirst for these sort of stories. Commercially, yeah, it's more of a challenge, but it's Australian stories in general, no matter whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous, are struggling to get told on TV and film everywhere.
Ask Anucharan about, tell us about your work. He went to study graphics there. He studied engineering in Coimbatore. I hope my wiki references are right. So, and then he worked in TCS, went on to study graphics there, worked there, and then came. Tell us about how it was, because we've always heard about India and Australia being strong on graphics and post-production work and computer graphics and stuff. And what made you come back here and choose to make films here?
Yeah, mine was a crazy journey. I finished my engineering in Coimbatore, and then moved on to and started working in IT company. And then while I was doing that, I was constantly interested in films, and I was researching and how to go about it. So there was one interview by Steven Spielberg. When he was young, he says that for any director, for anyone to become a director, you need to learn animation, computer animation. And he gives a definition of why, or explanation of why he says that, which was quite, I could connect with it. So I thought instead of, because I was trying to find a course on filmmaking, but then this advice made me choose masters in animation, because when you do animation, you learn everything: direction, camera work, edit. You have to literally create a world out of nothing. So in a canvas, empty canvas. So that was quite interesting for me. So I took that journey, and I finished my course. I did my course there, and then but I was always into live action filmmaking. So I learned as much as I could from animation, but my point was, my idea was, my aim or passion was to do live action. So I did a short film with my friends, Infinity. There was a short film festival that I came to know through my friends, Trop Fest Sydney, which was one of the which was the world's biggest short film festival. It was like a huge music festival that was being celebrated. The filmmakers were being celebrated, and they were trying to find talents, filmmakers.
You heard about it, Andrew? Trop Fest in Sydney?
It's a pretty big film festival. So I saw that, and I wanted a reason to make a film. So there was I thought I'll make a film and send it to them and see what happens. So I made a film, and then I sent it to them, and to my surprise, it was selected to the semi-finals, and I was like, it was really happening. And then it didn't go to the finals, but there was huge competition, and I think more than 1,000 films turned up. So I was pretty happy with the result. So with that, I made more friends, and I got commercial work such as music videos. I was given works.
You were working in Sydney then?
Yeah. I studied only for 2 years, so for the rest of the 3 years I was working in TV shows, music videos. supermarkets and paying my own bills, and it was quite struggling, but I was enjoying the stay there because I got to work on things that I really wanted to work. So it was a crazy journey. I did TV shows, music videos, short film. There was another short film that I made in the middle, and it was received very well as well. So this was happening, and my next, even though I was shooting all this, my interest was always feature film making. So I wanted to move to the next stage, and in Australia, government really, if anyone is interested in going to Australia and making films, government is actually pretty interested in backing up, funding the projects heavily. I think more than 50%. If you start the project with some kind of money, they'll support you. Once the project is on, they'll support you heavily. So it's actually quite easy to make films in Australia, to be honest. You just have to get a good crew.
You have to be systematic and transparent.
Yeah, that's it. That is one of the main reasons why people from Australia end up in Hollywood. A lot of good, talented people end up in Australia.
So Andrew, we're going to be depending on the consulate to tell us more of all this during the Chennai International Film Festival. Get around to talking all these things more. I'm going to have questions from the audience. Before that, I want this mic to go to Praveen. As an actor, as a stage director, that particular bit, because I thought of it, and how has it evolved? What's your thought on the performance here? Because most of them are proper aboriginals who've been working on that.
It's a complex device actually that the director has used, because his narrative is an epic narrative, which is why we sort of relate to it. It's very much like your Panchatantra stories or your Mahabharata. There's a story within the story. It's ancient and it's completely contemporary. It's like Umberto Eco starts his Name of the Rose in exactly the same fashion. So there's this embedding of the story within several other stories. The camera work, the director has chosen 3 different registers. So you start with the narrative. The first narrator is the camera. So the camera is moving around and you have the voice. And so the voice and the camera embedded that way, married that way. In the story of the 10 Canoes itself, you go into the black and white section where the camera is unobtrusive, or you are to believe that the camera doesn't exist. Counterintuitively, it's in the main story that you get into in the ancient past that the actors actually come across that wall. But it's not just a frontal storytelling technique, because he's also using that real tight close-up to get us to see the internal life. So it's a dual device like that, which I find it's fascinating. There's a complexity to it, which makes it, there's a tension to it. And as you rightly said, the first round you only see their faces and what they're thinking. And the second time around, he does that already when he's introducing the characters right at the beginning.
But that was a proper frame. This was like they're coming forward and they're looking probably at their reflection or something on the
So which is probably why he set it up like that in the beginning. He probably structured that later. In my mind, I would have structured it later. But he brings that in right at the beginning of that story, that the actors come and they reveal themselves through that across the wall, talking directly to you.
Well, like I've seen it in some documentaries too, where a camera is placed and you allow the subjects to actually relate to the camera like that.
Yeah.
I also want to ask Preeti, right? So Preeti is a dancer and you work a lot with your body, exploring these things. And I found it, after he's dead, that whole sequence, it was fascinating how the dance thing, him dancing and the other warriors coming and dancing, and how they say the soul doesn't want to leave sometimes, and then they have these leaves beating. So tell us about the pacing, the movement, all that as a dancer and all music.
I found the whole film absolutely fascinating in how embedded within body it was. It There's no kind of telling of the story that takes you away from how people stand, walk, talk, sit, move, work. Somewhere the functional body is so present in the entire film, and you can't take that away from the storytelling. So that was beautiful. In the scene that you mentioned, where he's allowing his spirit to leave his body, and there is this death dance that goes on. I mean, all that I know is from my uncle Didi, actually, about the Aboriginal people and the land.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And from a very young age, this notion that the land is not something that you're on, or that it's an extension of your body, it's an extension of your spirit. And this is something that keeps coming back to me every time. I've seen all of the films you mentioned before. But this, of course, is told from a perspective that's completely owned, and completely this idea of the earth as an extension of the body, and as matter passing into matter and becoming released in its own way, and complete and whole in its own way, and this connection of your conscious life to an afterlife. I think it may be one of the most persuasive contributions that art can make in this moment of climate change, actually. You know, because rational science gives you a whole lot of things which, as irrational beings, I mean, human beings are irrational. And somewhere to have this kind of a knowledge available to you, to take you to that moment of irrationality that exists within you, I think that's the best one can do at this point of time. It's a personal point of view, though.
Thanks. Can we have the mic with R.V. Srinivas? Because it was interesting and I knew you'd come up. When we spoke, when we talk, I know we talk about it. That men all over are men and women all over. There are these magpie voice is something he said about that. And also on a serious note, I know we've been talking about our government's policies with the environment, and Saida also mentioned about it, Preeti was talking about it. This whole thing of being more sensitive to the earth, which is something we see there and which we have followed. So both on a lighter note about men, women and all those things, on a serious note about the environment, your observations with this story.
Okay, I'll skip the comments on the environment because I have very strong views on what we're trying to do. No, we'll park that for another time. But what I was mentioning, and I'm quite happy to mention that again, at the end of this movie, I feel I might have been an aborigine in my previous life, because I was just telling Shailaja, men all over the world keep talking about the same things. Nothing much has changed. Today is Chennai, and whatever time frame that movie was set in, we're still kind of talking about the same things about other people's wives.
And the last bit reminded me of a Bhagiraj film or something, where this the Yama brother standing and all the wives saying, he's my husband too, he's my husband too. And yeah, I think the humor, what I read about is quite true. Subtly they tell you, patience. It's about telling us also, be patient, watch it, things like that. Any other people, did you feel any reference to some of our stories?
One of the things we're missing, what we haven't said, and I'll just say very briefly, is that all Aboriginal people in Australia have a particular common philosophy, and that's encapsulated in what we call the dreaming, what's called the dream time. And so to understand this movie, you have to understand the dreaming, which will take won't be easy to explain, but that's why it starts in a waterhole and it ends in the waterhole. It's about country, but it's about dreamtime ancestors. He says a big giant water iguana created this place, and that is a reference to the dreamtime. Aboriginal people believe that at first the world was just empty and darkness, and then at a particular time these dreamtime ancestors emerged, and they were like half kangaroo, half man, half emu, half woman. They were the dreamtime ancestors, and they lived during what was called that dreamtime, creating the mountains, the swamps, the rivers, everything. And the present day Aborigines are actually descendants of their dreamtime ancestors and reenact the journeys that the dreamtime ancestors have. But to get that right, Aboriginal people actually know every single plant, animal, creature that you can see with the naked eye. And they have stories about them, they have songs about them. It's just extraordinary. I went on a hunting trip and we were going down this kangaroo dreaming track because it's a song line. You're singing a song and you're following the kangaroo track. Okay, then we kill the kangaroo, and then an old man calls me over and he starts singing. I said, "What are you singing?" And he said, "Look, see this tick? I'm singing the tick dreaming song because there's stories about the tick." And then he said, "This is not the only tick." And he pulls out another tick, which is slightly different. And he said, "This is a different tick. But this has its own dreaming and its own song." So every living object and plant and animal and creature has its dreaming. You see, so it's very complex. But that's why, to get the whole story into context, you've got to finally understand this philosophy of the dreaming.
And one of the things I found yesterday when I was looking up this whole Noidok week and all that on the net, I was just sharing with Senju Lakshmi and Andrew. So I spent a lot of time on Flinders Street, which is a very popular station from which I used to get off and walk. And so it spoke about this. He went around Australia and there was this aboriginal, I can't remember his name now, it started with B. And there was this person who was the chairperson of this Noidok week, and she spoke about there is no single statue of him or nothing majorly known about him, though Mr. Flinders has spoken highly about him and how integral he was for this whole voyage, because his knowledge of local food, what is poisonous, what is not, was very high. So it has saved all the crew. And though he didn't understand their language, he was a person who went to the natives there where they had to stay for a while. So he was such one of the most important confidants of this main voyage of Flinders, and how we don't hear most of those tales. So I think this is something as a country most of us need to address, about plural voices, about being patient to listen to others and not be stuck in our thoughts alone. In fact, when Andrew suggested the film, the first sequence I saw was that long one, coming from and the ease with which they said, "Yeah, I went to the mom's vagina and my dad had a dream, he knew I was there." This ease of, like today, I get quite concerned with censorship also. So this had so much of frontal nudity that I had to tell people, I sent a message to all my club members, because sometimes we take offense to these things, but we don't take offense to so many things which happens in mainstream cinema. So many debatable things. And it was the first sequence where I saw, which says the same thing. I go back to the waterhole, which immediately said this is a fantastic film to watch. Yes, you have something to say, ma'am?
I just wanted to comment on the timelessness of the whole movie that we watched. We were taken out of time, as it were, and transported to an age where there was this complete understanding between man and nature, or between human beings and nature. That was so profound in the movie. And another thing is that sense of humor you kept talking about. There was another movie made some time back in Australia called Barbecue Nation. I don't know if you've heard of it, where the land, or Australia, was originally inhabited by the whites, and it is the indigenous tribes or the aboriginals who come and invade this white country and take it over. Mm-hmm. That was made by aboriginal filmmakers and actors, and it was really hilarious. I don't know if you've heard of that movie or seen it. It's called Barbecue Nation. Mm-hmm. But it's a counterpoint to what we're talking about here.
It's always interesting that way.
Yeah, that's just a comment I wanted to make, but I wanted to just say that I enjoyed your talk, as well as how you got the others.
Do keep coming to Cinema Randezvous. So next Saturday also, I look forward to seeing all of you. Thanks everyone for joining us. And can I invite Mr. Krishnan to please hand over a small memento to the young filmmaker Anucharan here.